All right, back to get into this next bit of taxonomy. So now we've established the idea of change over geologic time, evolution from invertebrates to vertebrates, and then now this idea of biodiversity. So all of the different types of organisms on planet Earth. And it's tremendously diverse, right? All the fungi, all the plants, the bacteria, all the animals, but specifically what's going to pertain to our course this semester is the diversity of vertebrates. And it's still quite diverse, right? The different types of vertebrates, the different classes, and then all the different species amongst all those classes of vertebrates. So in the past, let's go back to Darwinian days, right? How did they keep track of all this diversity? Well, they would kind of collect the specimens, collect the plant, collect an animal, document where it came from, maybe sketch it, preserve it, stuff it. But all the diversity was sort of done, was completed through the morphological sort of idea, the external features, color, shape, size, and that worked for many, many years. Yeah? What we know now is that we have the technology now, I should say. We can go in and look not just at morphology, at the finalized phenotype at the protein level. We can actually go and analyze the DNA level. Right? And at the DNA level, we can see shared similarities, things that have changed over time, things that have been retained similar over time, and that helps us to more accurately develop this taxonomical hierarchy. And we're going to go through this throughout the semester. It's an important theme also of the course: ecology, evolution, and this idea of taxonomy. So categories, genres. These genres go from the most specific to the least specific, right? And it can be flipped either way, but I like to think of these like as big cereal bowls, right? And the biggest of the cereal bowl would be the kingdom Animalia. Everything we're going to cover this semester is considered an animal, right? But earthworms are animals, centipedes are animals, butterflies are animals. They're not vertebrates, right? So we're going to then start to focus on the idea of the phylum level. So kingdom, phylum, we're going to focus on phylum Chordata. There's other phyla of animals, but the phyla we're going to focus on is this idea of chordates. So animals that have a backbone, chordata. And then of all the chordates, we have the amphibians, the frogs, the snakes, bats, what else? Fish, all these kind of chordates. But we're going to focus maybe on this guy right here, which we say, well, that is a mammal. So within the class Mammalia, well, there's a lot of mammals. There's horses, there's rabbits, wolves, humans, right? So we're going to focus then on the order Carnivora, those mammals that eat meat, right? So there's, again, many mammals that eat meat, cats and dogs and, again, humans. So we're going to focus only on those mammals that have large canine teeth. So the canids, Canidae family. And then we get into the idea of the genus and then the species. And I'll elaborate on those in a bit. So the taxonomical hierarchy, I want you to know that. We're gonna hear that often throughout the semester, but kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So taxonomical little categories that make it easier for the scientists to keep track, right? It's maybe impossible to know every single species out there, but if we know some characteristics of each of these levels, then it gives us an idea. Oh, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about, right? So taxonomy used to be quite challenging. Well, it can still be quite challenging, but in the past, you can imagine around Darwin's time when they were just bringing in all these species, I should say before Darwin's time, they were bringing in all these species. whoever was working in the museum, poor soul, they had to kind of keep track of all these specimens from all over the world, different languages. It just started to become, too overwhelming. There was too many problems, right? Problematic, confusing. Let's say that, in England, you're talking about a robin. So they're talking about this little orange, sort of orange face, orange cheeked bird. And okay, so let's say they say this is a robin, and they write a paper about the robin's mating behavior, the robin song. Okay, cool. And then somebody sends you this other bird, say, no, this is a robin. Say, oh, damn it! Well, I thought this was the robin. Now you're telling me this is a different bird, right? So you can see that would have been a problem if we used these common names. I say you're in Australia and you say, oh, bears are so sweet and they make good pets. And you're somewhere in Alaska and like, man, I don't know. Somebody tells you, oh, little bears like it when you go and scratch behind their ear. Oh, I've read that bears like it when I go scratch behind their ear, and you go and try to scratch this behind it, bad things are going to happen, right? So the idea of common names and not being useful. So that leads us to a historical figure. I like this guy, right? Carl von Linné. I think he came up with a solution. I can imagine his life was miserable with all these different confusing names. So he said, you know what, put a timeout, right? Enough is enough. It's too confusing. So what he did in 1758, he established a system that we know as binomial nomenclature. By two nomial like names, right? So a system, a nomenclature name, or a nomenclature system of two names, right? So binomial nomenclature. So he was so serious that he went the next day, he literally had his name legally changed, right? And what he tried to do was convert all of the different types of names into primarily Latin, but also Greek names, and only a two-part naming system. So, he said, you know what, guys, I'm serious, right? To show you how serious I am. So on Thursday, he was Carl von Linné, and on Friday, he was Carolus Linnaeus, right? He literally converted his name into a two-part name, and he Latinized that name. So he did this to kind of keep track of all the diversity. And a little bit of this still kind of transcends today, right? You have a first name and you have a surname, a last name. You might have a middle name, but it's this sort of system of first name and last name. And many of your cousins have your same last name. And so if you hear that same last name, oh, well, yeah, so these people must be related to this person. And that's what he was trying to do with this binomial nomenclature system. He picked Latin. It was kind of the language of scholars. It was kind of a language that was on its way out, kind of an extinct language. And his idea was, if it's extinct, the words are not going to continue to evolve. They're not going to mean different things. Once they mean that, that's what that language dies, and that meaning continues throughout. If he had picked English, our English language is always changing, right? And if you talk to your little brother, your nephews, man, sometimes like, man, I don't know what they're talking about. I think they're saying words that I've heard, but those words mean something different sometimes, right? And I don't even know if it's a good thing or bad thing anymore sometimes. But so the idea of change and the idea of binomial nomenclature. So what Linnaeus tried to do, right? He came up with this sort of two-part system, and there's going to be some grammatical rules that we have to follow. So the species name, I don't know if you've heard species. I will address what a species is in a bit. But the species name was comprised of a genus and an epithet. And if we go to grammar class, an epithet is an adjective and a genus is a noun. So in the Latin language, Latin is the basis for a lot of the Romantic languages, French, Spanish, Italian. In these languages, the adjective and the noun are different than in English. right? So if I say, I don't know, like we have a white background. So the white cat, right? In English, the adjective comes first, right? We have a white and a cat, right? In Spanish, that they're flipped around. So in Spanish, you would say el gato blanco, the 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 cat white, right? And it just kind of slipped around. So when we name these things, when we practice our binomial nomenclature, we're going to see that the nouns come first and then the adjectives come secondly. So the genus name is always capitalized, and then the species name, both collectively, the genus and the epithet, are going to be italicized or underlined. In the olden days, they didn't have these fancy computers, so everything was underlined. Today, with computers, with a click of a button, you can italicize these names. But even if you know nothing about, man, I don't know what that is, right? As long as you see that it's italicized and it's two names, capital, lowercase, you know, oh, they're talking about some sort of species there. Two names, underline, oh, that's going to be some sort of species binomial name there, right? So I think all of you have heard of E. coli, bacteria. Escherichia coli is the full name. You may not have heard of the scientific name. I think you know of a rattlesnake. We call it Crotalus atrox, right? So that's the name. So doesn't mean much if you don't speak Latin, but if you do speak Latin or Greek, oh, there's some, the names make sense, right? It does make sense. So Crotalus, like a little rattle, like a little bell, and then atrox, bad temper, atrocious. So whoever named this thought, man, that's a feisty little snake, atrocious behavior, atrocious attitude with a little bell, right? So Crotalus or Crotalus atrox, that's where that name is derived. So what is a species? And here we open a door for what we call the different types of species concepts. There's several species concepts, and we can sit and argue and debate for the rest of the semester on which is the best species concept, right? And once we win that debate, we take it to the field of microbiology or another field, and then that debate's going to continue because the way that species reproduce is different, right? So bacteria can undergo mitotic reproduction, asexual reproduction. Very few vertebrates can do that, right? There are some that can. So again, it muddies the water, but it's not ideal, right? It's not the best of the best, but it's this old species concept from Mayer in 1940. And that's the species concept that we're going to use for the duration of this semester. Right? And again, if you took zoology in another institution, maybe they might pick another species concept, right? But again, I'll be the first to admit this is not going to work 100% of the time, but I would say about 95% of the time for this semester, it will be just fine. Yeah? The biological species concept. What this is, Mayer in 1940 kind of put this in writing, that a species or species are groups of interbreeding natural populations which are reproductively isolated from other such groups. Okay, what does that mean in English, right? So groups of interbreeding natural populations. So natural in the sense that they occur without humans sort of introducing, you know, like if a human brought a bunch of koala bears into El Paso and released them here, well, that would not technically be natural because the koala bears didn't naturally make their way by themselves to this area. So wherever these species naturally occur, these natural populations, and they are able then to interbreed. That's going to be a big quantifier, qualifier here, right? So they must be able to interbreed with themselves, but not breed with different groups. So think of like a dog and a cat, right? They're common pets. They're always around each other. This would be like their natural population because of artificial selection, but they're not able to breed. Well, maybe they might try. A little dog might try something, I don't know, but they're not going to be able to produce offspring, right? So this is a big deal. Fertile, not just offspring, but fertile offspring must be produced. So if members are of the same species, they can reproduce, and then their offspring are fertile and they can continue to reproduce. So we're tracking DNA basically. How can DNA be passed from generation to generation to generation? And if DNA can't be passed on, then we say, no, then that's not a valid species. Yeah? So in this situation, we look at a horse, we look at a donkey. And morphologically, you can say, well, they're different. They're kind of similar, but one is bigger, one is smaller. So we can kind of visually see, morphologically see differences, but I don't know, maybe they get lonely out there in the barn or something. They can be crossed. So they can interbreed, and they do produce this offspring that we call a mule. However, the mule is a genetic dead end, right? That mule is sterile. It's a hybrid. So there's two separate species that have crossed, and their offspring is not able to continue passing on. So if that mule was fertile and could continue to reproduce, then we would say yes, horses and donkeys are members of the same species, but that's not the case. So there was a reproductive event, but the offspring was not fertile. So not members of the same species. And that's sort of this idea of a species. So when I talk about, oh, this species or that species, I'm not talking about one individual organism. I'm talking about that whole natural population that is capable of breeding and producing fertile offspring, right? So we're going to see this a lot throughout the semester, right? We see the notation where we have our genus and then our sort of our epithet there, genus, epithet. They all have the same genus. So we know, well, they're all very similar. They're all lizards, right? They're all little anoles. Different epithets, either describing where they live, where they were described, different features, maybe named after the person that discovered them. So these kind of ideas there. So it works the same for other groups, plants and fungi as well. So the genus and then the different epithets. Plants, genus, epithet. So when we look at these ideas of taxonomy, right? Two things are going to have to happen in your mind, right? You're going to have to be able to see differences amongst these different groups. So why is this one in this taxonomical category and not in this other one, right? Well, your brain will have to be able to find either morphologic or genetic differences between the two. And again, maybe some of you are really good at looking at differences. So if you look at these two, I'm not going to give you the answer, right? But I'll let you look at these two and I'll let you kind of pause there and see how many differences you can find there. But again, that's something that your brain will have to be able to do. Your brain will also have to find similarities, right? So can we think of a similarity between a human baby and a T-Rex? Think, well, they're so different, right? So a human baby and a T-Rex. But if we start to really sit there and think, can we generate similarities? So the better you are at looking at similarities and differences, the better off you're going to be in the taxonomical realm of vertebrate zoology. So they're different skills, but we're going to have to get practice at both. Right? Finding differences in things that look similar, and then finding similarities in things that look very, very different. And practice, practice, practice. We're going to practice with this as we go throughout the semester. So we've been talking about morphology. Now we get into phylogeny. So this is something that Carolus Linnaeus didn't have. This is something that the past zoologists didn't have. It's been, since the 1950s that Watson and Crick discovered DNA, and it's taken a while for our technology to become very efficient where we can isolate DNA easily and analyze, sequence, all that stuff. So today when we work with taxonomy, we look at things at the genetic level, not just at color and size and shape, but actually shared sections of DNA. If you're familiar with Ancestry.com or 23andMe, you know that this is what they do. They do genetic analyses, and they can tell you you're more closely related to this person, or you came from this area, you're related to this group over here. And that's what they're doing. They're looking at shared DNA. And what the visual representation will be is this sort of tree. They call these phylogenetic trees with branches, with stems, with nodes. And we interpret this based on the past and then more recent. And the more distant that one of these branches comes off, the more distantly related that something is to the other. So phylogenetic tree, a diagrammatic hypothesis about the history of the evolutionary relationship of a group of organisms, right? Falls within the realm of taxonomy, but not just morphological taxonomy, taxonomy at the genetic level, the phylogenetic level. So just to kind of summarize, we showed you a picture of the wolf earlier. And let's say that we have these different groups. So a cat, a leopard, a wolf, a horse, a turtle. So let's bring in our names, our taxonomical names, and let's now integrate with the phylogenetic tree analysis. So we got to start somewhere, right? And we start with the organism that we think that seems to be the most different. Right? In this case, of all of these, we say, well, the turtle looks the most different, right? So we're gonna, the scientist, the taxonomist has to designate it as the outgroup. It's gonna be what the outgroup is, just a starting point, right? As what we think is the most different of everything else. So we establish, well, that turtle looks very different than these, right? So we're gonna make it our outgroup. So this is gonna be the first branch off of our tree. So of everything else that's left, we say, well, what similarities do they have? They're different, but what similarities do all these have? Well, they all have fur. They all produce milk for their babies. They are all mammals, right? All right, so they're all mammals, and that then would be this important distinction. So whatever we put here, for in this case, we put hair, everything on the tree beyond that must have that feature. So if I put hair, the group to the left must not have hair. Everything to the right must have hair. Everything beyond that branch must have hair. So hair, okay, that's correct. Turtles don't have hair, and horses, wolves, leopards, domestic cats have hair. So class Mammalia. All right, so horse, wolf, leopard, cat. Let's separate out the horse. So what separates out the horse from the rest of these organisms? Say carnivorous. The horse is herbivore. It eats plants. It's got different types of teeth than the predators. So we get now into the carnivores, carnivora. All of these are carnivores. So everything to the right is carnivorous. To the left would be then not carnivorous. Well, we have wolf and then cats. What separates a wolf from the cats? Then we look at the claws, right? Cats can retract their claws. Dogs and wolves have claws that are always out, right? So that separates out the wolf from the cats, and then that gives us a different family, right? So class, order, family. And then now what separates the leopard from the cat? The leopard cannot purr. The cat can purr. And I don't know if you know what purr is. Purr is like their little motors running. It seems like the little motors running. Cats can do that. I can imagine that would not be good for a large predator like a leopard. Right? It would make so much sound that the gazelle could hear it from a distance away, maybe. I don't know. But so the idea of that. So again, just trying to show you how these trees are originated and then how they would be interpreted. We're going to get practice with this as we continue as well. So with that, again, a little crash course in taxonomy, phylogeny, binomial nomenclature, species, So I do hope that this helps a little bit with some of the Labster simulations, and it's going to be a basis for things we get into throughout the rest of the semester there. Right? So hope that makes sense, and keep on keeping on there, right? I'll be seeing you on the next discussion.